How do you respond when you receive feedback that your communication style isn't working and needs to be improved? How do you land a big promotion within your company, even if you don't have the perfect skill set to match the role? In today's listener Q&A themed episode, I'm answering these two questions, and I'm going to be sharing some valuable insights that'll help you grow your reputation, improve your communication skills, and accelerate your path to leadership. I am so excited. Let's dive in. Welcome to The Art of Speaking Up, a podcast that helps professional women access the limitless potential that lies within them. I'm your host, Jessica Guzik, and my mission is to help you find that spark inside you that has the power to transform your career in ways you may not have thought possible. I'm so excited that you're here. And now, on to the show. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is the final episode of 2024, and if you're listening to this episode right around the end of the year, I hope that you are experiencing a satisfying and rewarding completion to this year, and I hope you're feeling as excited as I am about the year ahead. I feel so ready for growth. I feel so personally ready to tackle my own goals and all of the things that I want to create and all of the ways I want to evolve. And so I hope you're feeling that same motivation and that same energy. I wanted to close out this year's worth of episodes with a listener Q&A episode. So today you're going to hear me answer questions that have been submitted by you, listeners of the show. This is a 2-part episode series because I wanted to cover as many questions as I could, and I also wanted to answer your questions in depth. I didn't want to give you skimpy surface level answers because the truth is most of the questions that I received are big questions that require some space for me to properly answer them and really help you through them. So with that, in today's episode, you're going to hear me answer one question about how to address critical feedback around your communication style and another question around how to position yourself for a promotion, even if you don't have the exact perfect skill set for the role. If you want to submit a question for me to answer in a future Q&A episode, I will share the link in the show notes. And with that, let's dive into the first question. So this person said, a little over a year ago, I switched careers from an administrative assistant at a construction company to an executive assistant at an education facility. How do I move past the remarks from the supervising dean that I am rough around the edges? Okay, I have a lot of thoughts for you on this question. So what I'll say is, even though you made a switch from the construction company, which I'm assuming is maybe like a less formal work environment than the education facility, even though like you might be coming from a different working culture, the feedback that you got that you are rough around the edges, to me, feels very red flaggy. And when I say red flaggy, I don't mean red flag about you. I mean, I detect a red flag around the person giving this feedback. The reason I say that is because this is really low quality feedback. Low quality feedback is feedback that is often not super specific, not super actionable, and has a hint of like being judgmental. And this feedback isn't really giving you clear direction for change. So if, for example, the supervising dean said to you, I'd love for you to be more direct and concise in the way you share information, that's high quality feedback. Because number one, you know exactly what it means. And number two, it's not laced with any sort of judgment of you, right? It's not like the person's being like, oh my gosh, you're so wordy, you talk in circles, you need to stop. So this feedback fails on both of the criteria for high quality feedback. In that one, it is a bit judgmental, in my opinion. This is not the type of feedback I would ever give to someone who is working for me. And number two, it's not highly specific. So I just say that so that you can kind of like give yourself a little bit of grace in this process. And also Because I think it's important that, while we want to listen to the feedback that other people give us around ourselves, sometimes it's important to take it in with a grain of salt. And so that's just a suggestion that I want to share with you. That being said, I'm sure that you want to do a really good job in this new work environment and you want to impress the supervising dean. So I'll share some thoughts on how you can use this feedback to help grow and evolve within the organization. So because this is low quality feedback, what I think you need to do is you need to try to extract higher quality feedback from the supervising dean who gave you this initial low quality feedback. So you basically need to have a conversation with this person where you can ask them or him. In my head, I'm kind of assuming it's a dude, but where you can ask this person questions that will get you a form of feedback that is more useful to you, more specific, more actionable, and something that you can build like a growth plan off of and that you can really get to next steps on. So what I would do if this is me, assuming that the supervising dean is the person you're supporting and the person you report directly into, I would reach out to them and I would say, hey, it's been about a year now that I've been in the role, and I would love to grab some time, just the two of us, to have a deeper feedback conversation so that I can support you more effectively and really offer you the level of communication and support that works best for you. And then when you have this conversation, I would come into it with very specific questions that you would love for the supervising dean to answer. So I wouldn't do it as like an open-ended thing where you're just like, hey, supervising dean, give me all the feedback. I would come in with specific questions. Here's what I would ask. Number one, the first thing I would ask is, what is your ideal communication style? When someone is sending you an email or giving you a verbal update, what are a few qualities that make that communication really effective for you? And then I would ask a few follow-up or deep dive questions to get even more detailed feedback. So a couple follow-up questions you can ask are, I'd love to hear what you consider to be a really strong speaking presence or like a really effective executive presence. You can also ask a follow-up question of like, is there anyone in the organization whose communication style you find particularly effective? And what is it about that person's communication that you feel like really works for you? Then at the end of the conversation, what I would say is, I would say, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. It has been really helpful. I actually want to use everything that you shared to come up with a growth plan for myself. And so I'd love to take all of this information and come up with a couple of goals that I want to aim to hit when it comes to improving my own presence and my own communication. If it works for you, maybe I'll circle back and share that with you. And it'll be something that I will be focused on moving forward. And my hope is that we can check in every few months to see how things are going. The main goal is I want to make sure that I'm supporting you at the highest possible level. And I want to make sure that I'm growing in the role, because as I grow in the role, I can support you better and better. And then what I would do is I would take everything that you learned from the supervising dean in this conversation, and I would distill it into 2 or 3 specific actionable goals that you want to work on. Don't feel like you have to take everything that they shared and work on every single thing. You're much more likely to be successful if you can boil it down to 2 or 3 things. Even 2 meaty communication goals would be enough. And I would want you to list out what those are. Like, what are the 2 or 3 goals you're going to hone in on? And then for each of those, I want you to come up with examples of what it looks like when you're doing that thing really well. So for example, let's say one of your high-level goals is, I want to be more concise when I communicate. I'm just making this up for the sake of this example. So some ways that you can show concrete examples of what that would look like is you could say, okay, I will know that I'm communicating concisely when the majority of the emails that I send you are no more than 3 to 4 lines long, or I'm able to lay the context for a question that I have for you in just 1 or 2 simple sentences. Or another example could be, you're noticing that when I email you or ask you a question, it's feeling easier for you to respond to me because you're getting less of a long-winded question coming from me. So that's an example of taking a high-level goal and breaking it out into specific examples. And this becomes your roadmap, right? Like you have your big buckets of the areas where you want to improve, and you have specific examples of what it looks like. The examples are really important because without them, it can be really hard to measure progress, right? So like if you want to have a conversation with the supervising dean 3 months from now, how are you going to know if you're getting better at the areas that you're focusing on? Well, if you have examples listed out, then you can look at those examples and be like, okay, have I been doing these for the past 3 months? And what I would do is have ongoing conversations where you're going through these buckets. And what you're doing is you're sharing how you think you're doing. So you're coming in saying, okay, here's how I think I'm doing on the conciseness goal. Here's how I think I've been doing for the past 3 months. Here's where I've really had wins. Here's where I feel like there's still opportunity for me to grow. And then you want to ask the supervising dean for their input and say, do you agree? I'd love to get your thoughts and any adjustments you would want me to make in this area. So basically what you're doing is you're taking control of this feedback. You're taking control of it by first understanding what this person wants from you. And then you're taking control of it by setting that as a goal and monitoring your progress against that goal. And for this stakeholder in particular, one of the main themes is to get more specific, more concrete feedback, because rough around the edges, number one, I feel like it's judgy, but number two, I just don't feel like it's useful. It's something that's really hard to respond to. Like, what does that even mean? Okay, I hope that is helpful. Thank you so much for submitting the question. Before I move on to the next question, here is a brief skit for your enjoyment. Everybody dance now, done. Dun, dun, dun. Hey, Jess. What is going on in here? Oh, hi. I didn't realize that you were in the room. Forget everything you just saw. That's gonna be kind of hard to do. You are in a really good mood. What's been happening? Someone just left a super kind review for the podcast. I don't get reviews often, so I tend to overflow with joy whenever someone leaves a good one. Hold on. If you enjoy getting positive reviews on the podcast so much, why do you never ask for them? Well, I don't want to bother people or annoy people or ask too much of people or be too forward with people or be too self-involved or become too, hold on. Isn't the whole point of this show to encourage women to stop being afraid to take up space, to stop worrying what other people think of them, to own how good their work is and ask for what they need? Why not be an example of that and ask for what you need? And even if you do annoy people, why should that prevent you from celebrating the work you do and asking for what you want? I never thought of it that way. I always thought I shouldn't annoy people, but you're kind of right. Maybe I should annoy people. Maybe the point is to be more direct and honest and bold, even if it annoys people. Exactly. I think you know what you need to do next. Yeah, okay, hello, listener. Thank you for being here. It would mean so much to me if you would rate and review the show wherever you're listening. Congrats, Jess, you did it. You asked for what you wanted. How do you feel? Everybody dance now, done. Dun, 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 dun. I'm going to take that as you feel great. And I'm going to see you later. Bye. Okay, back to the episode. Here is the next question I received. This person said, I had a late start in my career due to my own insecurities and feel like I've been stagnating for 10 years with only lateral moves. I just recently started to develop concrete professional goals that I feel passionately about, but I'm struggling to know how to get my foot in the door into a new higher role in my company. How can I demonstrate that I'm a strong candidate for a new management role when I don't have the technical skills on my resume to meet all of the criteria for the job requirements? Also, thank you so much. Your podcast has taught me so much. Oh my gosh, you're so welcome. And thank you for those kind words. I appreciate that. That means so much to me. I have a bunch of thoughts for you. So the first thought that I want to share with you is something that I share with a lot of my clients, but there comes a point in our career where it becomes useful for us to just ignore job requirements and job descriptions. There's a story that I often tell my clients that I think will be really helpful for you. When I got my first big executive role, a recruiter reached out to me. And they said, hey, this team at the Walt Disney Company is hiring, and we think you'd be a great fit for this role. And that recruiter sent me a job description, and I opened up the job description, and it wasn't even like an imposter syndrome thing. It wasn't even a situation where I was like, oh, I'm not confident in my abilities, because I was feeling very confident about myself at that point in my career. But I literally looked at the job description and I was like, oh, this recruiter reached out to the wrong type of person. This is a finance role and a bit of an operational role. And that's literally not what I do. I'm a strategist. So like this job description literally isn't for me. It's a mismatch. It's not my skill set. It's not even what I want to do. So I replied back to the recruiter and I was like, thank you so much for reaching out. I'm actually a corporate strategist and I'm looking more for strategy roles, but I appreciate it. And if I think of anyone who might be a fit for this, I'd be happy to pass their information along to you. And the recruiter answered back and was like, no, we do think that you're right for the role. Like, this is a strategy role. We want someone with a strategy background. And I was just so confused because the job description didn't at all read like a strategy role, like at all. And I had been doing strategy for years. I had seen many strategy job descriptions. They're all very similar. This was a very different kind of job description. It really didn't seem like that. But the recruiter was a bit more forward and really thought that I was a fit. So I went in and I did the interview and it ended up being a strategy role and I ended up landing that job. It was just a really poorly written job description. And so I learned from that experience that like people don't know how to write good job descriptions, no judgment on them. But it really made me see that we take these job descriptions so literally. And sometimes the people writing them don't even know what they're supposed to put in them. So it's really a shame then if we see a job description and because of imposter syndrome, we're like, oh my gosh, I'm missing all these skills. I can't do this role when you don't even need those skills. The person writing the job description literally like doesn't exactly know what's needed for the role. So after that happened, I just kind of decided like I will never discount any role that I want ever because it looks like I'm missing things. Now, this story that I shared, this example, I wasn't really like discounting myself and being like, I have imposter syndrome. I'm not good enough for this role. It was more a situation where I was like, this isn't the right role that I want. But the lesson was exactly the same, which is like, you cannot take the job description literally. So whenever you see a job description and there's things on it that you haven't done, it's really important not to discount yourself. And it's also really important to remember that if you are really good at just getting things done and moving the ball forward and figuring things out and building relationships with stakeholders, there's not that much that you can't figure out or can't get done within an organization, especially if you're moving into a management role where you're going to be hiring people on your team to help you execute, which means if there's a specific area where you are missing subject matter expertise, you may have the opportunity to hire for that on your team. So it's really important to realize that we can aim so much bigger than we think we can. And the first piece of advice I would give you is try to forget the fact that you are missing technical skills. Just assume it literally doesn't matter and assume that your company would rather have someone who is committed and savvy and focused versus someone who has all of these technical skills. It's better to just make that assumption and boldly go after the role than to discount yourself and be like, well, I'm missing all these skills, right? And, maybe once in a while, there will be a role where they say, listen, you're missing technical skills, like you're not ready for this role. But it's not going to be that 100% of the time. So we never want to assume that it is that. We always want to assume that we can succeed in this role if we are smart, savvy, adaptable, and determined. Okay, so this brings us to another part of your question, which is like, how do you get your foot in the door for this new and higher role? So there are a few pieces to this. I'll share them all with you. The first is you want to think about this as a long-term process. So you want to think about this as like over the next 12 to 24 months, my focus is to take a series of actions that moves me into this role. Now, it might not take that long. You might be able to land the role in a faster time frame, but it's helpful to see it as a gradual build because that can make it feel less overwhelming and less daunting, where it's like, oh, okay, for a few months, I'll focus on this, and then I'll focus on this, and then I'll focus on this. So let me give you some of the things that you can focus on one by one to make this feel less overwhelming. The first piece is relationships. So what I would look at is, who are the key decision makers for hiring for this role? And I would rate your relationship with those key decision makers on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being like, they don't know who I am. 10 being like, they know who I am and we have a great professional relationship. So I would list out any person who you think has decision-making power to help you land that position. And that will include the people on that team, but that might also include your boss, right? Like maybe your boss has some clout to help you land the position. Maybe your boss's boss has some clout to help you land the position. But I would literally list every single person who you can think of. And the criteria for this list is, if this person really likes me, would that help me land this role? If the answer to that question is yes, their name goes on the list, and you give them a rating from 1 to 10 in terms of how well they know you and like you. And then you want to look at that list and you want to find the people that are significantly below a 10 out of 10, and you want to work on raising that number. And the way that you're going to raise that number is 2 ways. One is by getting to know those people. So you're probably going to want to reach out to them and just have informational chats. I know these can feel really scary, but one of the best ways to frame an informational chat with a stakeholder is just to say, hey, I'd love to connect to just learn more about your priorities and what's going on with your team, so that as our work overlaps, I can be sure to be supporting you very effectively. And the more I know about what your priorities are and what lies ahead, the better I'll be able to do that. That's a really nice way to do it, especially if your work crosses over with their work. If your work doesn't cross over with their work and there isn't really a true case to be made that, like, if you learn about their priorities, you can plug in with the work that you do currently to help them. Like, if that's not relevant, if they're in a totally different part of the company, then I would see if you can find a warm introduction. So a warm introduction just means that someone that you know in the company knows that stakeholder and will make the introduction for you. So rather than you reaching out to like Bob on this team that you're hoping to get a management position in, you ask Amy, who already knows Bob, if she would send a note to you and Bob on CC and connect the two of you. Typically, when we get a warm introduction, like when someone who knows both us and the person we want to connect with makes that introduction, it's just so much easier for that person to say yes to sitting down with us and getting to know us. And then when you actually have that time with the stakeholder, I would ask them questions about them and their career path and express your interest in pivoting into that area of the company and see if they have any thoughts for you. So that's what I would share there on the relationships piece. The other thing that's really important for you to do is, as those relationships are getting stronger, you want to make sure that you're vocalizing your desire to make this pivot. People have to know that this is something that you're interested in, and they have to know this ahead of time. So it's not the type of thing where it's like on a Monday, you're going to tell everyone that you want this role, and then on Friday, you're going to get promoted into the role. It might be something that you talk about for months, and then all of a sudden, the opportunity comes up for them to move you into the role. And you don't know exactly when that opportunity is going to come up. Like, you can't always control it. There's sometimes an element of chance. So the sooner that people know that you are interested, the more runway you have for there to be that window of opportunity for you to get offered to move into that role. Now, here's what I'll say, though. Here's one caveat to that, which is that you don't want to mention it too soon if your relationship with those stakeholders that I mentioned earlier aren't super solid. So if you make that list of stakeholders and you rate yourself a 1 out of 10 for all of them in terms of how well they know you and like you, it's not a good idea to very quickly come out the gate and tell them all that you want to move into this management role. I would first work on strengthening those relationships. And then once they're getting stronger, then it's something that you can bring into the conversation. So this is something that comes up a lot when I'm helping my clients get a promotion, But while we want to be very clear and vocal with people that we want the promotion, before we do that, we have to make sure we've built like a base level of goodwill. Because otherwise, if we haven't, like if people aren't happy with our performance or we don't have strong relationships within the company, and all of a sudden we're like, I really want this promotion, it can land in a way where it can look entitled or it can look like we're jumping the gun. And that can really work against us in terms of getting the promotion. So it's so important to just ask yourself, like, do I have a good foundation of relationships and people respecting me and mutual respect? If so, it is appropriate to introduce this into the conversation. Okay, I have one more thing that I want to share, which is that you want to start building a case or a story for why you can succeed in this role. So what I would do is I would ask myself, what are like 2 or 3 traits that if I have these traits, people will feel comfortable that I can really crush it in this role. And then once I know what those traits are, I would reverse engineer and I would work backwards and be like, okay, how can I make sure that I'm working on projects that allow me to demonstrate these traits so that 6 months from now, I can look back at all of the work I've done over the past 6 months and I can have a very clear story of, okay, over the past 6 months, you watched me do A, B, and C as I worked on projects X, Y, and Z. And A, B, and C are exactly what is needed to succeed in this management role. And I would love to bring A, B, and C into this management role so that I can help our company achieve even bigger things. So you basically want to build that story now, identifying what are the traits that will lead to success in the role? So what is A, B, and C? And then you just want to make sure that you have work and projects in your pipeline that will really allow you to demonstrate those things. So in summary, to help you land this role, 1, ignore anything on the job description that you don't have experience in. Just like literally assume it doesn't matter because it literally might not. Number 2, strengthen your relationships with the people who can impact your ability to land this role. Number 3, make sure people know that this is a role that you are interested in pursuing. Of course, make sure you have enough goodwill with people before you do that. And lastly, number 4, figure out what traits are needed to succeed in the role and make sure to be getting yourself on projects or finding work that allows you to demonstrate those traits. Thank you so much for submitting this question. And that brings us to the end of part 1. But if you loved this episode format, do not worry. There is a part 2 coming out next week, and it is juicy. I'm answering one question about how to communicate with and handle leaders and executives who are a bit more aggressive or antagonistic. And I'm also answering a question around what to do if you struggle with assertiveness and if you tend to fall back on people pleasing. And I'm really laying out what the change process looks like when you're experiencing that struggle. So definitely tune in next week for more listener Q&A. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you so much. And if you found this episode helpful, please, number 1, leave a rating for the show. As you heard in the skit that I shared with you in the middle of today's episode, those ratings and reviews mean so much to me. And number 2, share the show with someone you know who you think would really benefit from the guidance and information that I share on the Art of Speaking Up podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I'm wishing you the best end of 2024 ever, and I will catch you in part 2. Bye.